So we've all seen our fair share of exorcism movies. So is this anything different? Kind of. So The Pope's Exorcist stars Russell Crowe, an Academy Award-winning actor, as you may know from Gladiator, and it tells the story of the chief exorcist of the Vatican. Literally, his job is to go into situations where they think there's demonic possession, and he's there to get rid of the demons. A family moves into a dilapidated church, and you guessed it, one of the family members gets possessed.
Bring me the priest.
Now you may think this sounds like a really boring, run-of-the-mill exorcism movie, but it really isn't. It actually surprised me in a lot of ways. I watched the trailers and I thought, oh, here we go, a studio movie. We've got Russell Crowe, brilliant actor, as usual. Let's see how it goes. Went to it, came out of it with a smile on my face. I really enjoyed it. So first we'll go into the positives. Russell Crowe, man. He never ever fails to deliver. He is so great in this movie. He has this sort of Italian accent which threw me off at first, but I kind of got used to it as the movie went on. He even rides a Ferrari moped. That just tipped the balance for me. This turned this from a movie that I was enjoying anyway to something that was just laughable, but in a good way. His performance was zany, quirky. He just brought everything to it, and you could tell that he really enjoyed this role, and it really surprised me because he is an Academy Award-winning actor. He has done many films, and for this to be a role for him to do, it just seemed weird, but worked. Totally worked. His performance overshadows the whole film. I will get into that in the negatives of how it affects other characters, but all in all, Russell Crowe, brilliant. The Italian accent wasn't really like there. It still had this sort of fake Italian accent to it, but I think that didn't draw me away from his performance. The movie does dress itself up as like an exorcism movie, obviously, The Pope's Exorcist, but it has this mystery to it, talking about sin, talking about the church, talking a little bit about history.
98% are recommended by him to doctors and psychiatrists.
And also it tries to say that this is based on a true story. I'm sorry. Now, Sony, I don't believe everything that has happened in this film, but also the Conjuring universe did this sort of marketing where it's based on a true story, based on a real person, but took it to extremes where you believe nothing has happened in that movie that actually happened in real life. But going back to the story points that I enjoyed, there was a lot of mystery, a lot of intrigue. It did have a slow pace at the start of the film, and then it quickly sped up as story points were revealed to you. And let's go back to Russell Crowe. He had this zany, quirky character, which made the tone of this film have a lot of levity, which is really good in horror films, and I think a lot of horror films don't do that these days. I think they take themselves a bit too seriously. Some of my favourite horror films is like the Evil Dead franchise, and how that kind of has that balance of horror and comedy, and it had that in this film, surprisingly, and it worked for me. Then we'll move on to the cinematography. The cinematography itself was actually pretty good, but as you can guess, this is a studio movie with a lot of money put into it. Maybe not tons and tons of money, but it has enough to get Russell Crowe to do the movie. I mean, come on. But the cinematography reminded me a lot of James Wan's films, and this could easily fit into the Conjuring universe. If they marketed this as a Conjuring universe film, I would believe it, and it has that tone that those films also have. Being a horror fanatic, I am a fan of those films, but it had these James Wan-isms. I don't know how to describe it. It has these dynamic camera movements, kind of like a fluidity to them, which makes it really fun to watch. And the set design, oh my god, the set design was beautiful. With it being set in a dilapidated church, I mean, come on, that's brilliant. It's a brilliant setting, and I think the set dressing and how they made the film look, It had a hue to it as well, which made it look quite gothic in nature in certain parts of the film, which I think really worked. Now we'll move on to the negatives. Whereas we had the positive acting, the great acting by Russell Crowe, we had the family. Now that is where one of the problems of this film lies. The film doesn't spend enough time with them, and that's not the only bad thing about the family in itself, is that it had really wooden acting, which is poor, because if you're watching a film like The Exorcist, which came out 50 years ago, you really feel everything in that film. Plays it safe, and I think that's its greatest downfall. But with the wooden acting on top of that, it really didn't make me care a lot for those characters. And there's also a part of the film where the family feel almost pushed aside. You don't get any resolution with them. They're kind of taken out of the movie almost without you knowing. It's really weird, and it tries to focus so much on the Pope's Exorcist, which I think is its strength. One of the main negatives, in my opinion, is that the film isn't scary enough. It uses that dull down noise, and then it does a jump scare. Cheap jump scares sometimes, and you know, for some people that may work. For me, I can tell it from a mile away when they're going to do that sort of jump scare, but it just wasn't scary enough, because horror films need to be intrinsically scary.
Majority of cases do not require an exorcism.
If they're not scary, and I know people have different opinions about what scares are and what scares them, but genuinely, it just wasn't scary enough. So we're on to the mixed views of the film. It has a very corny ending. Although it did fit the tone of the film, it almost felt like an MCU film. It's weird, because it was like trying to gear you up for a sequel, possible sequel, but it got me interested in a sequel. I'd definitely watch it. I'll tell you that now. First day that opened, sitting in my seat with my bucket of popcorn and just watching that film from start to finish, hopefully enjoying it. But as what happens usually in Hollywood is a lot of sequels don't quite hit that sort of sweet spot with its sequel. Another mixed bag, I guess, is the effects of the film. With it being a studio movie, obviously there's going to be uses of CGI in there, and the CGI was a bit too much at certain points in the film, made it feel a little bit silly, especially with body contortion and things to do with the body, which The Exorcist never did any digital effects when it came to those sorts of things. It was physical effects, and it felt real, it felt tangible, whereas this film, it just didn't, unfortunately. It just had this design flaw to it, I guess, where it needed these effects to happen, and they didn't have the money for like a physical effect. So CGI effects and CGI blood and those sorts of things aren't my thing. But a lot of people do like those effects, but in this movie it doesn't quite work for me. There were also some demon designs in there, and those designs were great, and using characters from people's history that fed into this demon, and I just thought that was an interesting sort of effect. But it had a glossy sheen to the movie, which for me cheapens the look of it. And that's a major part of horror films, that I like the dirtiness, the grunginess. If you watch a Rob Zombie film, yes, I'm a Rob Zombie defender, but if you watch a Rob Zombie film, it's very noisy, it's kind of gritty, and you don't need that for all horror films, but I think for something that involves an exorcism, it needs that sort of grunginess to it for you to feel for the child that's been possessed. That's basically it about the film. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I'd probably give it a 3.5 out of 5. Now, that means it was entertaining to me. It was a good horror film. It's probably up there with like the sorts of like Megan, which is a film that I thought was gonna fail and not be good, and then watched it and really enjoyed it. So if you're up for something that's a little bit campy, a little bit fun, has a great central performance by Russell Crowe, then look no further, because this is actually a really good film and surprised me in a lot of ways.
You've been played. You took the bait.
Hopefully you enjoyed this review. It is the first of many. I will be having reviews of Renfield coming up. We've got next week Evil Dead Rise. I will have a ranking video of all the Evil Dead films on this channel as well. You may know us from doing roller coaster videos, but we wanted to basically put our love of horror films and our love of horror attractions as well as our roller coasters all in one package so that you guys can enjoy. Please like and subscribe and click that notification icon just to let you know when those videos will be up. And remember, stay spooky. Bye.